Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a topic so gloriously mundane, so incredibly specific, that it promises to lull you into the deepest, most blissful slumber. Picture this: you're not in your cozy bed. No, no. You're actually in a dark, damp cave, somewhere deep within the ancient Greek world, and the air is thick with the scent of damp stone and, well, something faintly reptilian. You can hear a soft, rustling sound, like 1,000 tiny scales rubbing against each other, and a low, almost imperceptible hiss. It's the sound of a Gorgon, perhaps Medusa herself, getting ready for bed. And trust me, her bedtime routine is far more complex, and dare I say, far more boring than yours. You probably won't survive this, not because of her petrifying gaze, but because the sheer banality of her nightly rituals will bore you to a peaceful, stone-cold sleep. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the entrance of this cavern, your modern sensibilities gently fading as the ancient world creeps in. The chill of the stone floor seeps through your imaginary slippers. The air, surprisingly, isn't overtly menacing, just lived in. You might expect a lair of mythical beasts to reek of sulfur and fear, but no. Instead, there's a subtle, earthy aroma, perhaps a hint of stagnant water from an underground spring. It's the kind of cave where you might find a particularly robust variety of moss, or maybe, if you're lucky, some ancient cave drawings, though probably not of Gorgons. Our journey tonight takes us deep into the obscure corners of Greek mythology, past the grand battles and epic quests, straight into the domestic sphere of creatures you probably only know from their most famous, most terrifying attribute. We're setting aside the heroic narrative, the clashing of swords, and the dramatic stares, and instead, we're focusing on the quiet, often overlooked, aspects of their existence. Because even a creature designed to turn you to stone must, at some point, unwind, right? They can't just be petrifying people 24/7. That would be exhausting. Even for a mythological beast, there must be a need for rest, for rejuvenation, for perhaps a cup of chamomile tea and a good book, or perhaps a good scroll. Imagine the sheer physical demands of being a Gorgon. All those snakes to manage, those wings, if you happen to have them, some do, some don't, we'll get to that, to fold away, and that constant, nagging concern about accidentally turning someone into a garden gnome. It's enough to make anyone yearn for a quiet evening. You might envision a Gorgon's day filled with terrifying pursuits, chasing hapless travelers through rocky ravines. But what about after the sun sets? When the moon, a pale orb, begins its ascent, casting long, eerie shadows across the land. Do Gorgons simply switch off? Do they power down like a smartphone at the end of a long day of doom-scrolling? Historians still argue whether the concept of Gorgons originated from ancient snake cults or perhaps early encounters with venomous creatures. Regardless, the idea of a female entity with serpents for hair, a petrifying gaze, and often a fierce, monstrous demeanor captivated the ancient Greek imagination. These aren't just one-off monsters. They are embedded in the very fabric of their stories, their art, their worldview. And like any creature, real or imagined, they must have had some semblance of a routine. After all, even the most formidable mythological figures can't be on all the time. Think of it as a divine form of burnout. You, dear listener, are now embarking on a journey to discover the surprisingly mundane side of monumental terror. We are exploring the little details, the tiny, almost imperceptible actions that fill the gaps between the grand pronouncements of fate and the dramatic clashes of heroes. It's in these quiet moments that the true absurdity, and indeed, the unexpected charm of their existence reveals itself. You might even find yourself feeling a peculiar empathy for these misunderstood creatures. Who knew a Gorgon could be so relatable? Maybe they too had trouble with their bed hair. As you continue your silent, unseen observation in the Gorgon's lair, you begin to ponder the very origins of these serpentine sisters. The concept of Gorgons isn't something that just sprang fully formed from the head of Zeus, like Athena. No, these creatures evolved within the rich tapestry of Greek myth over centuries. The earliest whispers of Gorgons are somewhat nebulous, often appearing as generalized monstrous entities, fearsome but not yet fully defined. Think of it like early drafts of a blockbuster movie villain. Lots of menace, but the details are still being ironed out. These early Gorgons often served as guardians of something valuable or as manifestations of primeval fear. They were forces of nature, perhaps. You wouldn't find them arguing about who got the last piece of ambrosia at a divine potluck. They were more elemental, more terrifying. The idea of their petrifying gaze, for instance, wasn't always a central feature. Sometimes it was just their general monstrousness that was terrifying. It's almost like the ancient Greeks slowly added more and more terrifying attributes until they arrived at the classic Gorgon and, well, fear. One mainstream historical fact about the early understanding of these creatures is that their image often appeared on ancient Greek shields and pottery, specifically as an apotropaic device. Apotropaic is a fancy word for something designed to ward off evil. So, warriors would paint a Gorgon's face on their shields not to petrify their enemies, but to scare away bad luck or vengeful spirits. Imagine that. Your shield is basically wearing a "Don't Mess With Me" t-shirt, featuring a monster whose sole job is to mess with everyone. It's like putting a picture of a giant spider on your front door to keep away regular spiders. Slightly ironic, wouldn't you agree? Now, for a quirky tidbit, some scholars suggest that the Gorgon myth might have even earlier roots, perhaps in pre-Greek cultures, or perhaps even in the fears associated with masks. Picture ancient rituals where terrifying masks were worn to embody spirits or deities. Over time, these masks, with their wide eyes and often protruding fangs or tongues, could have morphed in the collective imagination into the Gorgon's visage. So, perhaps the original Gorgon wasn't born, but worn. It adds a whole new layer to the idea of a creature that can turn you to stone. Maybe it's less about a physical transformation and more about being frozen in fear by something utterly alien. Historians still argue whether the earliest depictions of Gorgons were truly meant to represent a specific creature or if they were more generalized symbols of chaotic, untamed forces. Was it a specific monster or a category of monstrous? It's a bit like asking if dragon in ancient texts always meant a winged, fire-breathing lizard, or if it sometimes just meant really big, scary snake. The nuances are lost to the mists of time, much like the exact recipe for ancient Greek yogurt. Was it full fat? Low fat? Did they have Greek yogurt back then? These are the real mysteries, aren't they? As you listen to the gentle, almost rhythmic slithering of the Gorgon adjusting her coils, or perhaps just rolling over in her stony bed, you realize how much of ancient mythology is built on these fluid, evolving concepts. The stories weren't set in stone, pun intended, the way we might think of them today. They were living narratives, retold and reshaped by each generation, each storyteller adding their own little flourish, their own unique interpretation. One person might emphasize the snakes, another the wings, another the terrifying scream. It's like a game of mythological telephone, but with much higher stakes and infinitely more dramatic hair. So, while you're trying to keep your eyes closed, just in case, imagine the very first concept of a Gorgon. Not the fully formed Medusa with her tragic backstory, but something primal, something shapeless, a whisper of a warning against looking where you shouldn't, or seeing what you aren't meant to see. A cautionary tale born from the deepest, most instinctive human fears. And tonight, we're not just going to encounter that fear. We're going to gently tuck it into bed. As the imaginary cave air settles around you, you begin to distinguish between the various members of the Gorgon family. It's not just Medusa, you see. She's merely the most famous, the rock star of the Gorgon world. But there are three of them, sisters, born of the ancient sea deities Phorcys and Ceto. Their names were Stheno, Euryale, and of course, Medusa. Think of them as a mythological girl band, except instead of hit singles, they produced petrified statues. Stheno and Euryale, the elder sisters, often get overlooked. They are typically depicted as immortal, while Medusa, famously, was not. This distinction is crucial to their tragic family dynamic. Imagine the family dinners. Oh, Medusa, dear, try not to turn anyone to stone at the table again. And remember, we can't die. So try to keep your eye on your ambrosia. It must have been an awkward household, to say the least. These two older sisters, often depicted as formidable and equally terrifying, simply exist in the background of Medusa's more dramatic narrative. They're the support characters who get the scary lines, but never the deep, tragic backstory. A mainstream historical fact about these sisters is their shared parentage with other monstrous figures in Greek mythology. Phorcys and Ceto, their parents, were primordial sea gods, and their offspring included a veritable who's who of mythical nightmares. The Grii, those three old hags who shared one eye and one tooth, Ladon, the 100-headed dragon guarding the golden apples, and even the Echidna, mother of many famous monsters, including the Lernaean Hydra and Cerberus. So, being born into this family, the Gorgons were practically destined for a life of terrifying, monstrous existence. It was in their genes, along with, presumably, a predisposition for reptilian features. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some ancient sources describe Stheno and Euryale as having particularly piercing screams. While Medusa's power lay in her gaze, her sisters might have relied on a sonic attack, perhaps a shriek so terrible it would freeze you with fear, if not turn you to stone. Imagine trying to get a good night's sleep in their shared cave. Stheno, keep it down. I'm trying to petrify this annoying beetle and your banshee whale is rattling my snakes. It adds a whole new dimension to their character, suggesting a diverse portfolio of fright. Maybe one did the staring, one did the screaming, and one just, well, Medusa had her own unique problems. Historians still argue whether the distinct roles and powers attributed to each Gorgon sister were consistent across all ancient Greek traditions or if they varied significantly depending on the region and the storyteller. Did everyone agree on who had what power? Or was it more of a fluid concept, like ancient fan fiction? It's hard to say for sure, but it adds to the mysterious allure of these figures. The details are as shifty as a shadow on a moonless night. As you listen to the subtle sounds of the cave, perhaps the drip, drip, drip of water echoing softly, you can almost hear the faint echoes of sisterly squabbles. Did they argue over who got to wear the best pair of snakes on their heads? Did they share beauty tips, perhaps a special blend of viper venom to keep their scales shiny? Or did they simply exist in a state of perpetually menacing coexistence, each too terrifying to truly bother the other? Their immortality, a key difference from Medusa, meant that Stheno and Euryale would endure. They were eternal, unchanging figures of dread. While Medusa's story is one of tragic transformation and eventual demise, her sisters simply are. They are the constants in a world of flux, the unmoving pillars of fear in a shifting landscape of myths. And as you drift deeper into this historical reverie, you can almost feel the ancient, timeless dread that these immortal sisters would have inspired. But fear not, for tonight, even eternal dread is simply a prelude to sweet, sweet sleep. Now, with the immortal sisters gently fading into the background, our focus shifts to the one Gorgon whose story truly captures the imagination, Medusa. Unlike Stheno and Euryale, Medusa was born beautiful, a mortal priestess, and her transformation into the monstrous figure we know was not her inherent nature but a divine punishment. This tragic backstory is what sets her apart, making her a figure of both horror and profound pity. Imagine waking up one morning, looking in the mirror, and instead of a bad hair day, you've got a head full of venomous serpents. And that's just the start of your problems. The mainstream historical fact regarding Medusa's transformation centers on Athena. The most widely accepted version of the myth tells us that Medusa was a beautiful priestess in Athena's temple, and she was either seduced or, more commonly in later interpretations, raped by Poseidon within the sacred precinct. As punishment for this defilement, Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, cursed Medusa, turning her hair into snakes and giving her the power to turn anyone who looked upon her face into stone. It's a classic tale of divine wrath, where the victim of a transgression ends up bearing the brunt of the punishment. Talk about a raw deal. You can almost hear Medusa sighing, "Well, this is just great. Thanks, Athena. Really appreciate it." For a quirky tidbit, some lesser-known versions of the myth suggest that Medusa's transformation wasn't just a punishment, but also a form of protection. By making her so terrifying, Athena effectively shielded Medusa from further unwanted attention, albeit in a rather extreme and socially isolating way. It's like being given a superpowered security system that also ensures you'll never have visitors. Imagine the awkward holiday gatherings. "Oh, you brought a new friend? Just try not to make eye contact, okay?" This perspective adds a layer of tragic irony to her curse, turning it into a twisted kind of divine favor. Historians still argue whether the earlier versions of the Medusa myth portrayed her as inherently monstrous from birth, or if the narrative of her tragic transformation evolved over time to add a more sympathetic dimension to her character. Was she always a monster? Or did the Greeks decide later that a good villain needed a tragic origin story? It's a bit like trying to figure out if ancient Greek reality TV had villains or just misunderstood participants. The truth is often as elusive as a shadow at midnight. As you picture Medusa, not as a static monster, but as a being undergoing this horrific metamorphosis, you can almost feel the cold dread of scales replacing smooth skin, the writhing sensation of serpents where soft locks once lay. The horror isn't just in her outward appearance, but in the complete, irreversible alteration of her very self. From priestess dedicated to a goddess, to a monstrous exile, forever isolated by her petrifying gaze. Her former beauty, once a source of pride, now weaponized against her. It's the ultimate bad hair day, every day for eternity. And then there's the daily management of it all. Imagine trying to sleep with a head full of living, slithering snakes. Do they tangle? Do they hiss in her ear? Do they demand little mice as snacks in the middle of the night? These are the real, unspoken challenges of being a Gorgon that the epic poems conveniently gloss over. They focus on the hero, Perseus, and his brave feat, but not on Medusa's struggle to simply exist within her cursed form. Tonight, we honor the mundane, the overlooked, the genuinely inconvenient aspects of being a terrifying mythical creature. And in the process, we find a surprisingly soothing path to sleep. Having established Medusa's tragic transformation, let's now delve into the rather unique challenges of Gorgon anatomy. It's not just the snakes, you see. Their entire physiology is a fascinating blend of human and reptilian features, creating a creature that, while terrifying, also presents some truly bewildering practicalities. Imagine trying to find a comfortable sleeping position with scales, wings, and a head full of writhing serpents. It's not exactly ideal for a restful night. A mainstream historical fact is that while Medusa is most famous for her snake hair and petrifying gaze, many depictions of Gorgons across ancient Greek art also include bronze wings and claws. This gives them an even more formidable, almost draconic appearance. So, it wasn't just a matter of avoiding eye contact. You also had to contend with a creature that could fly and probably had some seriously sharp talons. Imagine trying to get through an airport security check with those attachments. Ma'am, you'll need to remove your bronze wings before boarding. And are those live snakes in your hair? The indignity of it all. For a quirky tidbit, some myths describe Gorgons as having boar-like tusks. Yes, tusks. As if the snakes, wings, and petrifying gaze weren't enough. They needed an extra set of sharp, protruding teeth. This adds another layer of bizarre adaptation to their already formidable arsenal. One can only imagine the difficulty of maintaining proper dental hygiene with a mouthful of tusks. Oh, darling, did you remember to floss your tusks this morning? You don't want a rogue hero to find you with spinach between them. It's these small, often overlooked details that truly bring the absurdity of mythological existence to life. Historians still argue whether the varying anatomical descriptions of Gorgons, from different periods and regions, reflect genuine differences in mythical belief or simply artistic license. Did some Greeks truly believe Gorgons had tusks, or was it just a particularly imaginative sculptor having a bit of fun? It's a bit like trying to figure out if everyone in ancient Rome truly believed unicorns were real, or if it was just a popular fantasy creature. The line between myth and artistic interpretation can be as blurry as a Gorgon's reflection in a polished shield. As you mentally navigate the unique challenges of a Gorgon's body, consider the sensory experience. The constant rustling of snakes, the feel of scales against stone, the potential chill of metallic wings. It's a full-body experience of monstrousness. And speaking of scales, how do you keep them clean? Do they shed? Is there a special Gorgon brand scale polish? These are the questions that truly matter when contemplating a creature's bedtime routine. It's not just about turning people to stone. It's about managing a unique set of epidermal challenges. You certainly wouldn't want to wake up with a bed full of shed snake skin and old scales. That's a nightmare for any housekeeper, let alone a mythical one. And the wings. While Medusa herself is often depicted without them, many other Gorgons are shown with a magnificent, terrifying span of bronze wings. Imagine the logistics of trying to fit through a cave entrance, or even just curling up for a nap with those things. Do they fold up neatly like a bat's wings? Or are they rigid and awkward, constantly bumping into things? Perhaps they had a special, designated wing-folding spot in their lair, complete with instructions for proper storage. Remember to engage the tertiary lock on your left wing, Euryale, or it'll snag on the stalactite again. The indignity of having to deal with such mundane logistics while also being a terrifying, petrifying monster. It truly adds a layer of unexpected relatability to these ancient horrors. With the physical complexities of Gorgon anatomy firmly in your mind, your attention now shifts to their most infamous and terrifying power, the gaze. This is the ultimate party trick of the Gorgon sisters, the ability to turn living flesh into lifeless stone with a single, direct look. It's what makes them truly unique and utterly deadly. But how does it work? And how do you, as a Gorgon, manage such a potent ability in your daily life, especially when you're just trying to relax? A mainstream historical fact about the Gorgon's gaze is that its effect was instantaneous and irreversible. Once you met the gaze, that was it. You were frozen, a permanent fixture in their stony gallery. There was no undo button, no magical ointment to reverse the petrification, and certainly no refunds. It was the ultimate look at your own risk scenario. Imagine trying to explain that to a curious toddler. No, darling, don't look at Auntie Medusa. She's got a special eye disease that makes you into a garden statue. It sounds absurd, but for the ancient Greeks, this was a very real, very potent fear woven into their mythological fabric. For a quirky tidbit, some scholars suggest that the petrifying gaze might have been a symbolic representation of the overwhelming fear that freezes a person in place, literally turning them into a rigid, lifeless form. It's not necessarily a magical ray, but the physical manifestation of extreme terror. So, perhaps the Gorgons weren't actively firing a beam of petrification, but rather, their very presence, their monstrous form, was so utterly terrifying that it induced a fatal cardiac arrest, leaving the victim in a rigid, lifeless state. It's a bit like being scared to death, but with a more dramatic visual effect. Historians still argue whether the petrifying gaze was an inherent ability of all Gorgons from their conception, or if it was a divine curse bestowed upon them by the gods, perhaps to enforce a specific cosmic order. Was it a natural talent, or a highly inconvenient superpower they had to learn to control? It's a bit like asking if superheroes are born with their powers or if they got them from a radioactive spider bite. The details can be surprisingly fluid in the realm of ancient myth. As you consider the logistics of such a power, you realize the immense burden it would place on a Gorgon's everyday existence. Imagine trying to navigate your cave without accidentally turning your furniture into statues, or trying to have a conversation without petrifying your sisters. Perhaps they had to develop an elaborate system of averted gazes, constant warnings, or maybe even special eye coverings. Honey, did you remember your anti-petrification sunglasses before you left the lair? It's a full-time job just managing that one ability. You couldn't just casually glance over your shoulder. Every movement of the head would need to be deliberate and mindful. And what about sleep? Do they have to close their eyes completely? Do their eyelids somehow block the gaze? Or do they have to sleep with a blindfold on, perhaps a particularly sturdy one made of dragon hide? The thought of a Gorgon accidentally petrifying their own pillow in the middle of the night is both darkly humorous and utterly plausible. Imagine the morning after. Oh, not again. That's the third petrified pillow this week. These things are expensive. The sheer inconvenience of being so deadly must be a nightmare. This constant vigilance, this need to always be aware of where your eyes are directed, must be incredibly draining. It's not a power you can just switch off and on. It's an intrinsic part of their being. And yet, they must find a way to exist, to rest, to have some semblance of a normal, albeit monstrous, life. Tonight, we're not just exploring the power, but the profound implications of living with it, even for a creature of myth. And in doing so, we might just discover that even petrifying gazes can lead to profound relaxation. Having considered the monumental inconvenience of the petrifying gaze, you now imagine the Gorgon's nocturnal habits. What does a creature of such power and unique anatomy do at night? Do they roam the countryside, turning unsuspecting sheep into stylish garden ornaments? Or do they retreat to the shadowy depths of their lair, seeking quiet solitude? Given the need for relaxation, the latter seems far more plausible, if not a little bit sad. Even monsters need downtime. A mainstream historical fact suggests that Gorgons, like many mythical creatures, were often depicted as solitary or at least highly insular beings, preferring desolate, rocky landscapes or hidden caves. This reclusiveness isn't just a personal preference, it's a practical necessity given their ability to turn anything to stone. Imagine trying to integrate into a bustling ancient Greek village when your mere glance is a death sentence. Oh, Medusa's coming to the market. Quick, everyone wear blindfolds and face the wall. It's just easier to stay away from the hustle and bustle. Their hunting, if they did any, would likely be for food, not for fun, and probably confined to the less populated hours. For a quirky tidbit, consider the possibility that Gorgons might have developed a form of echolocation or heightened sense of smell to navigate their dark lairs without accidentally petrifying themselves or their belongings. If looking is off limits, perhaps listening or sniffing is the way to go. Imagine them slithering through the darkness, their snakes hissing softly, not in malice, but as a sophisticated sonar system. SSSSSSS. Ah? Yes, the slightly damp rock wall. Excellent. It adds a layer of ingenious adaptation to their otherwise terrifying existence. Who needs night vision when you've got 1,000 tiny tongues tasting the air? Historians still argue whether Gorgons actively hunted or if their diet consisted primarily of what stumbled into their lair. Were they proactive predators, or more like cosmic trap setters, waiting for unfortunate travelers to stumble upon their domain? It's a bit like trying to figure out if ancient Greek bears actively went fishing or just waited for salmon to jump into their paws. The exact daily grind of a mythological monster is surprisingly undocumented. As you picture a Gorgon settling in for the night, perhaps after a long day of, well, whatever it is Gorgons do, you realize the quiet stillness that would pervade their lair. No noisy neighbors, no loud chariots thundering by, just the gentle sounds of the cave. Maybe a bat fluttering overhead, or the distant murmur of an underground stream. It's the perfect environment for quiet contemplation, or perhaps a surprisingly early bedtime. After all, if your daytime activities involve turning people to stone, you probably want to be well rested for it. It's a demanding job. Their hunting habits, if they existed, would surely be a solitary affair. No pack hunting for Gorgons. Imagine trying to coordinate a synchronized attack with creatures who can't look at each other. Okay, on the count of 3, we all look at the gazelle. No, don't look at me, Stheno. I said the gazelle. It's a logistical nightmare. So, it's far more likely they were opportunistic, relying on the unfortunate few who strayed into their territory. This means long periods of quiet waiting, punctuated by brief, terrifying encounters. Not exactly a high-octane lifestyle. And think of the privacy. No unannounced guests, no door-to-door salesman. Being a Gorgon essentially grants you the ultimate do not disturb sign. It's the kind of isolation that, for some, might even sound appealing after a particularly long day of human interaction. So, as the gentle hum of your fan continues, imagine the deep, undisturbed peace that a Gorgon might experience as they finally settle down for their strange, stone-filled slumber. As the Gorgon settles into her nightly rhythm, a truly pressing question emerges. How does a creature covered in scales and snakes manage her personal hygiene? This isn't just about looking good for the occasional hero. It's about practical comfort and health. Imagine the sheer logistical nightmare of keeping all those serpentine locks tangle-free and all those scales shiny. A mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greeks placed a high value on personal cleanliness, especially before engaging in religious rituals or social gatherings. While Gorgons probably weren't attending many dinner parties, the general cultural emphasis on hygiene suggests that even monstrous figures, perhaps driven by an innate biological need, would have some form of cleaning routine. Perhaps they had a special, hidden spring in their cave, a natural shower for a creature of stone and serpent. It's certainly more pleasant to imagine than a Gorgon covered in dusty scales and unkempt snakes. For a quirky tidbit, consider the possibility of a snake detangler. Imagine a Gorgon painstakingly oiling each of her serpentine locks, perhaps with a special blend of olive oil, and something vaguely reptilian smelling. Do the snakes themselves enjoy baths? Do they preen? Maybe they have their own little combs. All right, Cuthbert, stop squirming. You'll never get rid of those knots if you keep wiggling like that. The image of a Gorgon gently coaxing her snakes into a state of presentable neatness is both absurd and surprisingly endearing. It adds a touch of domesticity to the monstrous. Historians still argue whether the detailed physical descriptions of Gorgons, including their scales and general reptilian features, were purely symbolic of their monstrous nature or if they were meant to imply a more literal, creature-like biology that would necessitate basic biological functions like shedding skin. Did they shed their scales like snakes? If so, imagine the piles of old scales accumulating in their lair. It's the kind of cleaning nightmare that would send any ancient housekeeper screaming back to the safety of human civilization. As you contemplate the sheer effort involved in Gorgon grooming, you can almost hear the gentle scraping sound of scales being cleaned or the faint, almost imperceptible hiss of snakes being untangled. It's not the roaring, terrifying monster from the myths. It's a creature engaged in the utterly mundane task of self-maintenance. Perhaps they even enjoyed it, a moment of quiet reflection as they meticulously cared for their unique form. A kind of monstrous self-care. And what about their faces? With that petrifying gaze, how do they wash their faces without turning their own hands to stone? Do they have a special, stone-resistant soap? Or do they simply avoid looking at their reflection at all costs, lest they become another permanent fixture in their own macabre collection? Perhaps they developed a very specific, no-look washing technique, relying purely on touch and muscle memory. It's a delicate dance, a perilous ballet of self-care. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we imagined for the ancient Egyptians? This is in a similar vein of peculiar ancient hygiene. Every culture, every creature, finds a way to keep clean, even if that creature has a head full of venomous serpents and bronze wings. So, as you drift deeper into relaxation, appreciate the quiet struggle of the Gorgon, battling not heroes, but stubborn tangles and shedding scales, all in the pursuit of a comfortable night's rest. As the Gorgon scales gleam from her meticulous, if imagined, cleaning routine, you begin to wonder about her attire. What does a creature with a head full of snakes and perhaps bronze wings wear? The ancient Greeks were known for their elegant drapery, their togas and chitons. But how does one incorporate such fashion into a monstrous form? A mainstream historical fact is that in many ancient Greek depictions, Gorgons, especially Medusa, are often shown wearing a simple chiton or peplos, sometimes belted at the waist, much like human women of the era. This suggests a surprisingly traditional approach to clothing, despite their monstrous features. Imagine the challenge of trying to get a flowing chiton to drape correctly when you have 1,000 small snakes constantly wiggling around your head. It's a definite fashion dilemma. Perhaps they just kept it simple to avoid complicated wardrobe malfunctions involving venomous serpents. Oops, there goes another snake hole in my new peplos. For a quirky tidbit, consider the possibility that the snakes themselves might have been adorned. Perhaps tiny gold rings, or even miniature headbands for particularly well-behaved serpents. It's a whimsical thought, adding a touch of personalized flair to their terrifying appearance. Imagine the Gorgon spending hours, not on her own appearance, but on accessorizing her individual snakes. Does this tiny pearl earring really bring out the subtle green of SSS Devon scales? It's a level of dedication to detail that human fashionistas can only dream of. Historians still argue whether the simplicity of Gorgon attire in ancient art was a reflection of their wild, untamed nature, or if it was simply a practical choice given their unusual anatomy. Was it a statement of minimalist monstrous chic? Or did they just give up on trying to find anything that truly fit? It's a bit like trying to figure out if ancient Greek fashion was about comfort or making a statement. Perhaps both, even for Gorgons. As you consider the logistics of Gorgon fashion, you realize the limitations they face. No elaborate hairstyles, obviously. No delicate scarves. The fabric choices would have to be robust, resistant to snagging on scales or tearing from flapping wings. Perhaps they favored rough-spun wool or sturdy linen, materials that could withstand the rigors of a monstrous existence. It's not about making a grand entrance. It's about practical utility. And what about footwear? Given their often depicted cloven hooves or clawed feet, Shoes would be an absolute nightmare. Imagine trying to find a sandal that accommodates a hoof. It just doesn't work. So, it's likely they went barefoot, a decision that probably made sense in their rocky, cave-dwelling environments. It's a sensible, if unglamorous, choice for a creature whose primary function is petrification, not runway modeling. Remember that peculiar punishment of having to walk through the streets of Athens naked? For a Gorgon, perhaps the greater punishment would be having to wear an ill-fitting, itchy toga that constricts her wings. The comfort of her own scales and bare feet might be preferred. It's all about finding that perfect balance between comfort and the demands of being a terrifying mythical beast. And as the gentle hum of your fan continues, you can almost hear the soft rustle of simple fabric as a Gorgon adjusts for sleep, surprisingly unconcerned with the latest trends. Now, as the Gorgon settles down in her cavern for the night, a rather poignant question arises. What kind of social life does a petrifying creature have? The answer, as you might imagine, is likely quite limited. Isolation isn't just a byproduct of their power, it's practically a design feature. Imagine trying to make friends when eye contact means instant sculpture. A mainstream historical fact is that in most Greek myths, the Gorgons are depicted as living in remote, desolate places, far from human civilization. This wasn't just for dramatic effect, it was a practical necessity. Any proximity to populated areas would result in a landscape dotted with unfortunate statues, an architectural style that, while certainly unique, would eventually run out of fresh volunteers. So their social sphere would naturally be confined to their own kind, which, in Medusa's case, meant her two immortal sisters, Stheno and Euryale. Not exactly a bustling social calendar. For a quirky tidbit, consider the possibility that the Gorgon sisters developed a unique form of non-visual communication. Perhaps they communicated through elaborate vocalizations, a series of hisses, clicks, and guttural rumbles that conveyed complex meanings. Or maybe they developed a tactile language, touching each other's scales or even their snakes to convey emotions or messages. Oh, Medusa, that particular scale rub indicates you're feeling quite peckish tonight, doesn't it? It adds a surprising layer of intimacy to their otherwise terrifying existence, a testament to sisterly bonds overcoming monstrous obstacles. Historians still argue whether the Gorgons genuinely feared human interaction due to their curse, or if their isolation was a manifestation of their inherently wild, untamed nature. Did they actively avoid humans, or were humans simply too terrified to approach? It's a bit like asking if a particularly grumpy badger prefers solitude, or if everyone just knows to give it a wide berth. The dynamics of monstrous social etiquette remain, for the most part, a mystery. As you imagine the Gorgons' quiet nights, you realize that their lives would be largely devoid of the everyday social rituals we take for granted. No gossip sessions over a cup of nectar, no shared laughter, no leisurely strolls through the market. Their interactions would be functional, perhaps, or limited to the occasional sibling squabble over cave cleanliness or whose turn it was to scare off particularly persistent adventurers. It's a lonely existence, even for creatures of myth. You might even feel a pang of sympathy for them, despite their petrifying abilities. Everyone needs a friend, even if that friend is covered in snakes. Think of the challenges in daily interactions. Ordering takeout would be impossible. Dating would be a non-starter. Even a simple game of charades would be fraught with peril. Okay, Medusa, act out bird. No, don't look at me. Just flap your wings. You're going to petrify the entire game night. It's a life of constant self-censorship, a perpetual struggle against their own intrinsic nature. So, as you listen to the soft, rhythmic breathing of our imaginary Gorgon, perhaps you can appreciate the profound silence of her social world. It's a world without small talk, without casual glances, without the myriad unspoken cues that make human interactions so rich and complex. Instead, it's a world of caution, of deliberate movements, and of an enduring, quiet solitude. And in that profound quiet, there is, surprisingly, a peculiar kind of peace. As you continue your silent vigil, the Gorgon's stomach rumbles, or perhaps her snakes stir with hunger. This leads to a truly fascinating, if somewhat unappetizing, thought. What does a Gorgon eat? Given their petrifying abilities, the traditional ancient Greek diet of olives, bread, and fish seems problematic. A mainstream historical fact about ancient Greek diets is their reliance on locally sourced ingredients. For ordinary Greeks, food was simple and seasonal, focusing on what could be grown or caught. But for a Gorgon, this becomes infinitely more complex. Could they forage for berries without accidentally turning them to stone? Could they fish without petrifying the entire lake? It's a culinary conundrum of monstrous proportions. So their diet would, by necessity, be dictated by their unique abilities and perhaps their remote habitat. For a quirky tidbit, imagine a Gorgon trying to cook. How do you prepare a meal when your every glance turns ingredients into inedible sculptures? Do they have to cook blindfolded? Or perhaps they have a very skilled, non-gazing chef assistant, a brave soul who doesn't mind living on the edge? The idea of a Gorgon attempting to bake bread, only to find a perfectly formed, stone-hard loaf, is oddly amusing. It's like a perpetually failing cooking show, but with higher stakes and less shouting. Historians still argue whether the petrifying gaze applied to inanimate objects with the same potency as living beings. Could a Gorgon turn a rock into a different kind of rock? Or was it primarily effective on organic matter? This distinction is crucial for their diet. If they could petrify plants, their foraging options would be severely limited. If not, then perhaps a diet of fruits and vegetables would be possible, albeit difficult to harvest. It's a bit like trying to decipher the ancient Greek equivalent of a food pyramid, but for monsters. As you contemplate the Gorgon's dinner, you might imagine her lair filled with the remnants of unfortunate wanderers, not just statues, but perhaps the stony husks of former meals. Perhaps a petrified deer, a perfectly preserved, if unappetizing, snack. This would certainly cut down on preparation time. No need for knives or cooking fires when your food comes pre-fossilized. It's a rather macabre, but highly efficient, way of stocking the pantry. Remember that peculiar punishment of being turned into an ugly old woman? For a Gorgon, perhaps the greater curse is a perpetual diet of stone-hard, bland sustenance. No warm bread, no juicy grapes, just the cold, unyielding taste of petrification. It's a solitary and arguably quite boring culinary existence. You can almost hear the sighs of exasperation. Oh, another petrified squirrel? Can't we have something with a bit more? Chew. And what about drinks? Could they drink water without turning it to ice or stone? Perhaps they had to rely on a special, non-petrifiable spring or develop a method of drinking without making eye contact with the liquid. The simple act of hydration becomes a perilous endeavor for a Gorgon. So, as the gentle hum of your fan continues, imagine the surprisingly monotonous, if not entirely stone-cold, gastronomic experience of a Gorgon, forever limited by her terrifying gift. Having considered the Gorgon's peculiar diet, let's now imagine the interior design choices of a creature whose touch and gaze turn everything to stone. Her lair isn't just a place to rest. It's a living, breathing museum of her accidental artistry. A mainstream historical fact about ancient Greek homes is that they were typically functional and modest, with an emphasis on practicality rather than opulent display. For Gorgons, however, practicality takes on a whole new meaning. Their decor would be less about aesthetic choice and more about unavoidable consequences. Imagine a cave filled with the petrified forms of everything that ever wandered too close or glanced in the wrong direction. Every piece of furniture, every discarded meal, a testament to their accidental destructive power. It's the ultimate minimalist chic, if your aesthetic is prehistoric sculpture garden. For a quirky tidbit, consider the possibility that Gorgons might have developed a morbid sense of humor about their unique decorating style. Perhaps they would arrange their petrified victims in amusing tableaus. A stone squirrel frozen mid-leap, a petrified adventurer caught in a perpetual gasp. Oh, that one? That's Gerald. He was quite rude about the snake hair, so I turned him into a charming conversation piece for the entryway. It adds a darkly playful dimension to their otherwise terrifying existence, a coping mechanism for an isolating curse. Historians still argue whether the presence of petrified figures in Gorgon lairs was seen primarily as a sign of their power and a warning to intruders, or if it was simply an unavoidable byproduct of their existence that they had to live with. Was it intentional decoration, or just what happens when you're a living statue maker? It's a bit like asking if ancient Greek ruins were built to look picturesque or if they just got that way over time. The line between function and accidental beauty can be surprisingly thin. As you mentally furnish the Gorgon's abode, picture the silent stillness. No flickering lamps casting dancing shadows for fear of petrifying the oil. No delicate tapestries, lest a wayward snake snag them. Just the cold, unchanging permanence of stone. Every surface, every object, a potential work of art, or a permanent reminder of a momentary lapse in concentration. You wouldn't want to bump into a petrified bat in the middle of the night. That's a toe-stubbing hazard of mythical proportions. Remember that ancient Egyptian custom of mummifying pets? For a Gorgon, every creature that enters her home eventually becomes a mummified, stone version of itself. It's an involuntary form of preservation. Her lair isn't just a home, it's a geological record of every unfortunate encounter. And the air, though still, would perhaps carry the faint, mineral scent of rock, a subtle reminder of the petrifying power that permeates every corner. So, as the gentle hum of your fan continues, imagine the surprisingly serene, if somewhat eerie, stillness of a Gorgon's lair. It's a place of permanent quiet, a testament to a power that freezes not just life, but time itself. And in that frozen stillness, you might find a unique kind of peace, a perfect backdrop for a deep, undisturbed sleep. As you settle deeper into the quiet solitude of the Gorgon's imagined lair, we stumble upon another fascinating, albeit peculiar, aspect of Medusa's story, her surprising progeny. Despite her monstrous appearance and petrifying gaze, Medusa was, in fact, a mother. From her neck, after she was beheaded by Perseus, sprang two unexpected offspring, the winged horse Pegasus and the giant Chrysaor. A mainstream historical fact is that this unusual birth narrative is a classic example of autochthony in Greek mythology, meaning birth from the earth or from a violent act rather than conventional procreation. It's often symbolic of primordial origins or a dramatic transformation. For Medusa, it's the ultimate post-mortem surprise party. Imagine the shock if, after vanquishing your foe, two magnificent, fully formed creatures emerged from their neck. Well, that's certainly not in the hero handbook. For a quirky tidbit, some interpretations suggest that Pegasus, the beautiful winged horse, represents the fleeting beauty of Medusa's former life, now liberated from her monstrous form. Chrysaor, whose name means he of the golden sword, could symbolize the raw, untamed power that was also a part of Medusa's essence. It's a poetic, if slightly gruesome, way of seeing something beautiful and powerful emerge from tragedy. It's like finding a pristine unicorn galloping out of a particularly unfortunate dumpster fire. Historians still argue whether the specific portrayal of Pegasus and Chrysaor emerging from Medusa's neck was a later addition to the myth, emphasizing the dramatic and symbolic aspects of her death, or if it was an integral part of her story from its earliest iterations. Was it always this dramatic, or did storytellers just decide to add more pizzazz to her demise? The evolution of mythological narratives can be as complex as trying to untangle a particularly stubborn knot of Gorgon snakes. As you consider this strange birth, you might ponder the kind of parenting Medusa might have offered had she survived. Would she have been a loving, albeit petrifying, mother? Would Pegasus have had to wear a tiny blindfold when visiting his mom? It's a scenario ripe with darkly humorous possibilities. The challenges of raising children when your every glance is a weapon must have been immense. No, look at me when I'm talking to you. Moments in that family. And the sheer incongruity of it all. From a monstrous, snake-haired being comes a creature of pure grace and beauty and a powerful warrior. It speaks to the complex, multifaceted nature of Greek myth, where light can emerge from darkness, and even the most terrifying figures can have unexpected legacies. It's a testament to the idea that even in the most gruesome of circumstances, new life, new potential can emerge. So, as the gentle hum of your fan continues its soothing rhythm, allow yourself to drift into the quiet contemplation of Medusa's strange legacy. Her story isn't just about terror and petrification. It's also about unexpected creation and the enduring power of myth to surprise and fascinate, even when you're on the very edge of sleep. With Medusa's unexpected offspring now acknowledged, our story drifts towards the inevitable, the hero's quest. For every terrifying monster, there's usually a hero destined to face them, and in Medusa's case, that hero was Perseus. But how does one even begin to prepare for a confrontation with a creature whose very gaze turns you to stone? It's not a challenge you can just wing. A mainstream historical fact is that Perseus, advised by the gods, was given several divine gifts to aid him in his quest. These included a highly polished bronze shield from Athena to see Medusa's reflection safely, winged sandals from Hermes for swift travel, and a magical, curved sword, often called a harp, also from Hermes or Hephaestus, perfect for decapitating monsters. It was a divine equipment loadout, essentially the ancient Greek version of getting all the cheat codes for a boss battle. You wouldn't want to show up to a Gorgon fight with just a pointy stick and a hopeful attitude. For a quirky tidbit, imagine the anxiety of having to use a polished shield as your only visual. It's like trying to defeat a boss in a video game by only looking at the minimap. Depth perception would be a nightmare. Perseus would have to constantly reorient himself, relying on the distorted, reversed image in the shield. Okay, is that her left or my left? Wait, am I turning right or left? This is surprisingly complicated. It adds a layer of clumsy realism to an otherwise heroic endeavor. One can almost picture Perseus awkwardly bumping into stalagmites while trying to get a clear reflection. Historians still argue whether the elaborate nature of the divine gifts given to Perseus implies that Medusa was considered an almost insurmountable foe, requiring extraordinary intervention, or if the gifts were simply a dramatic device to highlight the favor of the gods for the hero. Was she genuinely that tough, or did the gods just like showing off their gadgetry? It's a bit like trying to figure out if ancient Greek wrestling matches were genuinely challenging or just heavily staged. The line between divine assistance and narrative convenience can be surprisingly fluid. As you picture Perseus carefully, cautiously approaching the Gorgon's lair, you realize the immense mental fortitude required. Not just bravery, but an almost obsessive focus on the reflection, a complete suppression of the natural human instinct to look directly at a threat. Every rustle of snakes, every faint hiss, would be a test of his resolve. He couldn't afford a single moment of distraction. It's the ultimate exercise in self-control. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen? Perseus's preparation is on another level of peculiar practicality. He's not just preparing for a fight. He's preparing for a fight where looking at his opponent means instant petrification. It's like preparing for a boxing match where your opponent has laser eyes, and the only way to beat them is to use a mirror. The ingenuity required is truly astounding. So, as the gentle hum of your fan continues, allow yourself to imagine the quiet intensity of Perseus's final preparations. The clinking of his bronze shield, the soft rustle of the winged sandals, the almost imperceptible hum of the magical sword. Every piece of equipment, every divine gift, a step towards a fate that would forever alter the course of mythological history, and perhaps the Gorgon's nightly routine. And so, we arrive at the culmination of our Gorgon story, the final, most tranquil act, the Gorgon's rest. After a long, terrifying existence, filled with petrifying gazes, troublesome snakes, and the occasional heroic encounter, even a creature of myth must eventually seek the solace of sleep. Tonight, we imagine her settling into her unique slumber, a sleep unlike any other. A mainstream historical fact is that Medusa's story ends with her decapitation by Perseus, an act that finally brings an end to her curse and her life. However, for her immortal sisters, Stheno and Euryale, their existence simply continued. They were left to mourn their sister, to continue their solitary lives in their stone-filled lair. So, for them, sleep is an ongoing reality, a recurring part of their endless existence, unburdened by the threat of a hero's blade. They get to continue their peculiar bedtime routines, night after quiet night. For a quirky tidbit, imagine a Gorgon's dreams. Do they dream of human faces that don't turn to stone? Do they dream of luscious, unpetrified meals? Perhaps they dream of a world where their snakes are just hair. Or perhaps, being immortal, their dreams are simply echoes of geological time, eons passing in the blink of an eye, or the gentle shifting of tectonic plates. It's a concept that adds a layer of quiet, almost cosmic, introspection to their existence. Historians still argue whether the concept of restful sleep, or even a sense of weariness, was attributed to immortal beings in ancient Greek mythology, or if such human-like needs were purely reserved for mortals. Did the gods and monsters truly get tired? Or was their sleep more of a divine pause, a brief moment of inactivity? It's a bit like trying to figure out if ancient Greek superheroes needed coffee to start their day. The boundaries between divine power and mundane needs can be delightfully blurry. As you picture the Gorgon settling into her bed, perhaps a smooth, cool slab of polished stone, worn smooth by centuries of her coils, you can almost feel the absence of sensation. No soft mattress, no warm blankets. Just the cold, comforting embrace of the earth itself. Her snakes, having tired of their endless wriggling, might finally intertwine, finding a communal warmth, their tiny heads resting on each other, perhaps even emitting a soft, collective hiss of contentment. Remember the challenges of Medusa's unique anatomy? For sleep, these become her ultimate defense. Her petrifying gaze, now safely contained behind closed eyelids, or perhaps a thick, protective blindfold, is no longer a threat. Her scales, which might feel cumbersome during the day, now provide a natural armor, a protective shell against the cool night air of the cave. She is truly at peace, a creature perfectly adapted to her strange, silent world. The only sounds are the gentle, rhythmic breaths of the Gorgon, a low, almost imperceptible rumble that echoes softly through the stone chamber. Perhaps the drip, drip, drip of water from a stalactite somewhere in the distance. The profound stillness of her lair, filled with the motionless forms of those who once dared to gaze upon her, is now a sanctuary of quiet. There are no nightmares here, for what can truly scare a being who has seen and inflicted such profound stillness? She is the embodiment of static, of permanent quietude. So, as you listen to the soft, rhythmic hum of your fan, imagine the deep, undisturbed peace that finally settles over the Gorgon. Her long night of sleep stretches before her, a vast expanse of silence and stone. It is a sleep beyond human comprehension, a rest that is both ancient and eternal, a tranquil end to a truly boring history. As the final whispers of the Gorgon's story fade, feel the last vestiges of your waking thoughts gently dissipate. The ancient cave air, once crisp with the scent of damp stone, now softens, becoming hazy and warm. The subtle sounds of the imaginary lair, the faint, soothing rustle of scales, the almost inaudible hiss of slumbering serpents, blend effortlessly with the gentle hum of your fan, a lullaby of timeless tranquility. Your mind, once actively following the peculiar details of mythical life, now drifts, unburdened by curiosity or concern. The rigid outlines of fact and fiction blur, merging into a comforting, indistinct fog. There's nothing left to do, nothing more to learn, simply the quiet sensation of sinking deeper and deeper into softness. Allow the weight of your eyelids to grow heavy, your muscles to relax, every lingering tension melting away like frost in the morning sun. The world outside this moment holds no sway. Here, in the quiet embrace of historical sleep, you are safe, still, and profoundly at peace. Sweet dreams.